Now there was a certain man from Ramah Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zoph, and Ephrathite. I just wanted you to know I could read those words. He had two wives, mistake one. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord there. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah and his wife, and to his sons and her daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah. But the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. It happened year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat, and why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting at the seat by the door of the temple of the Lord. Interesting that the word temple is used, because in the time of Samuel, it was still within the tabernacle, which implies that it was written after the time of Samuel's death, and maybe even after the times of the kings. So much for that great word of wisdom. She was greatly distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look upon the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall not come to his head. Now it came about, as she was continued praying before the Lord, that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Then Eli said to her, How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from before you. But Hannah replied, No, my lord. I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink. I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a worthless woman, for I have spoken now out of the great concern and provocation. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you your petition that you have asked of him. She said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Talking about Hannah today. Who are the main characters in our lesson today? I chose the easy one, Hannah. Eli. Who else? Elkanah. So you don't want to pronounce the word Peninnah, huh? All right. Peninnah. Who else? Hophni and Phinehas. Okay. So let's talk about them after we talk about the times and the culture of the day. The culture of the day, that the context of our Sunday school lesson is, it was a general decline and a neglect of religion. People were not faithful to God's command, and the priesthood that was passed down from family to family. So Eli or Hophni and Phinehas would have received their priesthood credentials because Eli was a priest and a judge at that time. Some worshipped idols, many were remiss in their service to God, and wickedness was at the tabernacle doors. Enemies of Israel were great and mighty, and which meant that was the time of the Philistines. Shiloh was the only place to worship, and apparently people came to worship drunk because that's what Eli thought he observed. That's the culture of the day. So now that we've got a context a little bit of how the days were spiritually, etc., now let's talk about Elkanah and his character. What are some of the characteristics that we note about Elkanah?
You know, he loved Hannah.
He loved Hannah. Was that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes.
All right. Please elaborate. Yes.
Well, it was good for him to love Hannah, but it made for trouble
Why would loving someone be a trouble?
with the other wife.
Yeah, apparently there was a spirit of favoritism that existed here. Yeah. All right. What else do we know about Elkanah? I heard somebody mumble something.
She just mumbled, that's all.
Okay. Was she praying with her lips moving and no voice? What, Joe?
He was devout.
He was devout. And how do we know he was devout? He went yearly, as an example, up to Shiloh at the time of the feast. They were required to go 3 times a year. And it says that he went every year with his wife and children and to worship, there to sacrifice and to worship. Regardless of what the culture was of the day and what the general tenor of the spiritual level of religiosity, may I use that word, of the day, Elkanah was faithful to his God. All right? Any other characteristics that you want to throw in there? He married 2 wives, okay? And while we're on the fact of marrying 2 wives, why would he marry 2 wives? I never knew before. One commentator suggested that the reason he married was because Hannah was barren and he wanted to have children, and so he married another woman and paid for it the rest of his life. As part of last Sunday's lesson. All right. Anything else? Let's describe Hannah and her character. Now, this is a woman's type Sunday school lesson, and I'm not getting much women response here, so let's have some help. What's Hannah like?
She was a devout Christian.
Devout Christian? You're a little ahead of time, but devout Jew?
I know.
All right. We'll forgive you. You're at least trying to help me.
She wants to be a mom.
She wants to be a mom. Was it a sin thing that she wasn't a mom?
No.
Why wasn't she a mom? God had closed up her womb, right? In the background of our Sunday school lesson, that's your haunting question is going on. Why was she barren? Know any other barren women in the Bible? Sarah? Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Elizabeth? Which Elizabeth? Okay. All right. There was reasons for their barrenness. Okay. So we'll come back to that. She wanted to be a mom. What else? We're going to drag
That's
it.
why they had more than one wife. They wanted more children.
Okay.
And if she was thinking that she wasn't doing her part and giving her husband a child,
Okay.
a man child. Yeah.
Well, that would even be better, but a child would be. It was considered in the culture of that day that if you did not have children, there was something wrong with you as a person, and there was sin in your life somewhere. That was what it was deemed as the normal explanation of barrenness.
It was like she wasn't worth much if she couldn't have children. That's what they kind of.
All right. Thank goodness we don't do that in this day. All right, let's describe Penina. Agitator, yes. What else?
I think she was jealous.
Since she was provoking Hannah for not having kids, she could have been bitter because her husband showed more love to Hannah and not her, so she's probably hurting.
Okay.
Jealous.
She was, I think that's a good description, jealous of her husband's love for Hannah. Okay. And so to equalize out the playing field there, she tore Hannah down. Okay. And when did she particularly do this activity?
In front of others.
In front of others, where?
I don't know.
They went up to the house of the Lord.
When they went to the house of the Lord. Okay. Preacher, close your ears. We're talking about you here for a little bit. There are appropriate times to bring concerns about things that are not right in your own mind, whether it be 2 cents or $2 worth, it doesn't matter. But there are also times not to bring them. When it's time for the pastor to be in the pulpit, it is not time to unload upon them. Okay? And what we see here is we see Penina working Hannah over at the time of worship. And when you do that, you destroy the ability of that individual to be able to concentrate as they need to. All right, you can listen now. All right, so we need to be careful how we treat people who are supposed to be handling spiritual responsibilities, and how we talk to them and how we assist them or desist them as far as them being able to accomplish their work. What else do we know about Penina? She had children, and bunches of them, apparently. I can't remember the number at this point in time. All right, so what would we say about Penina? We would say that she was peevish and provoking. She ridiculed Hannah for her barrenness. She envied Hannah for the love of Elkanah, had several children, was unkind at the time of worship. Okay, we ought to bear one another's burdens, not create burdens for the other person to bear. Okay? Now we move on to Eli. Let us describe Eli. Eli was a
priest and a judge.
And he had judged Israel for 40 years. What else do we know about him? What?
Presumptuous.
Yes, at least in this one one situation, yes, absolutely. He made an observation and he observed that Hannah was drunk, or so he thought, and Hannah explained her situation to him. And in my Bible, I imagine a oops. He had to be corrected, and so he did. And then when he heard the situation, he sent her on her way with a blessing that God would bless him. What else do we know about Eli? Was he young or old?
Well, if he'd worked for 40 years, he had to be old.
Yes, he was old. He died at a ripe old age of 98 when Hophni and Phinehas were slain in the battle with the Philistines. Okay, and word was brought into town. He fell over backwards off of the stool he was sitting on and broke his neck because he was fat and he was old. Now, one of the things I learned a little bit as I was studying the lesson that hadn't occurred to me, I knew he was fat, okay? Why was he fat? Well, the easy answer is he ate too much, yeah. But the reason he ate and was fat was because the boys were stealing food that was the choicest of food, and Eli was benefiting from that. Okay? So, what do we have here? We have the spiritual leader that was condoning the boys' sinfulness by letting it slide. There was a prophet came into town and met with Eli and said, the things that your boys are doing is not good, and it's causing people to abhor worship time. You and I need to be careful that we don't cause people to abhor worship time when God is needing to meet with us to help us in our spirituality and our spiritual time. All right. Let's describe Hophni and Phinehas. They were the sons. They were the priests at that particular time. What do you know about them?
They were wicked.
They were wicked. Now, shall I embarrass him or not? How do you know they were wicked, Claire?
You know, they met with the ladies that would come to worship in a matter that evidently was not correct.
Okay. There were illicit affairs that were going on between Hophni and Phinehas and the women that was serving the people that came to the tabernacle to worship. Okay. And when the prophet had come and spoke to them about it, Eli went to his boys and said, boys, the things that I'm hearing about you is not good and it needs to stop. But what did the boys do? The boys chose to do evil. Now, when you and I are confronted by our sinfulness, we have a choice to make. And in that choice, we can choose to make corrections to our life, or we can choose to continue on in our sin. They chose to go on in their sin. As a consequence of that, God slew them in the battle with the Philistines. All right. Well, that about takes care of that Sunday school lesson. No. What are some of the things that we learn from the characters of our Sunday school lesson today?
Be persistent in
prayer.
Be persistent in your prayer. And we're talking about Hannah in this particular regard, okay? She was praying in a time of duress and stress, okay? Does God hear every prayer? He hears the prayer of confession and he hears the prayer of the righteous. But that's the end of the line as far as God hearing. Just throw that in as an editorial comment. Keep it in mind. All right? When Hannah was praying, what do we notice about Hannah? Hannah is being vexed by Peninnah. She is being politely rebuked by Elkanah. Now that had never occurred to me before, that Elkanah was reproving her for the words he said to her. Because he said, why are you not eating? Why are you sad? Why, I'm better to you than 10 sons. So it was a polite rebuke to her. And what did Hannah respond? Hannah responded by eating and drinking and going to worship service. Okay, and doing and following through on her sacrifices and such. The Sunday school lesson today, in my mind, is the practical outworkings of a Christian in a state of duress. How do you respond? I think that's what's behind the Sunday school lesson that we're just talking about today. So here we have Hannah being under stress and politely rebuked. And then she goes to service, and what happens? The main preacher chews her out in front of the whole world. And what did Hannah do? She said, listen, bud, I know a few things on you too. No, she did not say that. Out of the hurt of her heart, she says, don't you call me a woman of Belial. I'm not one of those worthless women that just come and make professions. Out of the intense agony of my heart and stress of my situation, I am calling out to God for help. Notice that regardless of how this woman was hit in the face and rebuked and talked sternly to and such, she responded with a gracious and wonderful spirit. And when Eli determined that she was a woman of agony and hurt, he changed his tune in a hurry, and he says, the Lord bless you and answer your request that you have asked of the Lord. Hannah got up. It's like the whole world changed. She didn't have a problem anymore, and she went back and they worshiped before they left in the morning, and they headed back home. And then what happened? A little baby came into the picture. And the baby was born, and she named that baby Samuel. She said, for I have received him of the Lord. And it came time for Elkanah to take his family and go to worship. And he says, let's go. And Hannah says, I'm staying home. And I'm going to stay with the boy until he's weaned. How old was he when he was weaned? Now this I got to hear. I see a 3. Do I see a 4? I don't see a 4, but I'm looking for a 4 and maybe more. So I looked it up. I talked to this lady, I can't remember her name, but she goes by the last name of Google. And she's a female. And because if you ask her questions, she has many suggestions before you get the question answered. Ask. All right. So I got an answer from 1 to 8 years old as a weaning time. It is guesstimated that Samuel was probably between 4 and 5. And I think that is reasonable because I don't see any way that Eli is going to tolerate a child of 3. Okay? I just don't see him being able to do that. All right. So, my question here is an easy one. When did Hannah give Samuel to the Lord? What? Before he was born. When Hannah made her prayer, what was it? If. Is it proper to pray if? All right, let me ask this question. When is it proper to ask when you're praying?
Thy will be done.
If it's thy will, okay? So there's no advancement of self, no advancement of the particular individual. We're talking Hannah now, asking of the Lord, if you will hear me and grant my request and give me a son, I will give him back to you. For how long? Forever. Now, what's unique about that? Because she made Samuel a Nazirite by the way she brought him up and into, as she was bringing him up as a child, she brought him up as a Nazirite. A Nazirite vow was for a period of time, and then once the period of time was up, then things would go back as they were before. Not Samuel. She said, I will give him to you for all of his life. So, the magical date arrives, and Elkanah says, it's time to go up and worship. And Hannah says, I'm going with you this time, and I'm going to take me a goat or a bullock of 3 years and some other things. And they went up to worship, and she says to, oh, Eli, I am the one that stood beside you years ago and said, if God will hear my cry and hearken to what I desire, I will give the man-child to God to serve for his whole life. And there she presented Samuel to Eli for the service of God. Hannah was consistent in all of her days, not only in requesting something of God, but also in her follow-through. Practical things for us to pay attention to. All right. When is it proper to pray if? Is it always proper to say if? Proper to pray that way? No. No. Lord, if you'll give me a 20% raise in income? No. Lord, if you will help me to have control over? No. The prayer of if it is glorifying God and is consistent with his will, and how would we judge that in our day? We go to the manual that was given to us, and we look in the manual, and if it's consistent with what the manual has to say, then we say we're on the right line. Okay, so we do not pray to enhance our own glory, our own selves in any way, but we're interested that God be glorified and that people be introduced to the ways of salvation. And it's obvious that that was the direction that Hannah was going. All right, what other things? We learn how to act in time of trial and provocation. There will be times when people will say things to you that are totally unnecessary. Now, my wife's not here, so I can talk about her. There was a lot of times that my wife was told that she really didn't do anything. All she did was stay at home and took care of kids. Well, that was kind of hard on her and kind of hard on the guy that had to listen to her stress. All right. I'd go home and she'd say, I didn't get a thing done today. There was a dozen jars of tomatoes and 6 jars of pickles that she'd canned. She didn't get a thing done that day. Well, I found out it was she didn't get her house cleaned the way she wanted it. That wasn't important to me. She was spending time doing things of raising boys that needed to be done and spending time with them. All right. How do we handle our stress and our provocation? What not to do in the treatment of others. Okay? That's one of the things we learn. The actions of Peninnah, you don't want to be one of those that vex and cause trial and strife at that time. Our evil can cause men to abhor salvation. Now, there's some people that say, I'm never going to go to that church because all they are is a bunch of hypocrites. Okay? And sometimes they're right. And we need to be careful along that line. But also, we know that that is an excuse that men use to hide behind the fact that they're being convinced by the Holy Spirit that they're not where they ought to be spiritually as well. But people, if we cause men and women and boys and girls especially to abhor salvation because of our lifestyle and our examples that we live out, God have mercy upon us.
Maybe he was the hypocrite. This man said that.
Very possible, yes. Very possible. Yeah. So what he should have said, I'm going to come down and join you, right? Sometimes we do not understand what others are enduring. I think that's a gift that we all got a dose of somewhere along the line. It's pretty obvious from a third-party point of view what you need to correct. And we need to be careful there. And we need to use the motivation of helping others by loving them into the kingdom. I don't know how to tell you this story, but I had a sister yesterday that was cackling about a practical joke she played. Now, I'll just say it was inappropriate in my mind, but we'll go from there. You make your own decision. She was at a service, their preaching service was coming up, and the preacher that was preaching used an iPad. If you're spiritual, you don't use an iPad. Oh, baloney. Anyway, the preacher used an iPad. And he laid it down in the back pew with his Bible and went to pray. Said sister, whose name shall be mentionless, and it's not the one here, so don't accuse. Don't be jumping to conclusions that are not correct. Took the iPad and hid it. When said preacher came back to regain control of his iPad, it was no longer there. Now, he apparently felt like Claire Walters when he left his notes at home, but, you know, he was kind of going through a panic and he could not find. He went somewhere because it was time to pray, and when when he went to pray, my ornery sister took the iPad and replaced it right where she found it exactly. And when he came up from praying, lo and behold, there was the iPad. Now, I think my sister was wrong. I have no problems with practical jokes. You guys know me well enough to know that. But not when it's right before time for service. Well, the preacher got up and said, I think I'm losing my mind. He said, I brought my iPad in here and I laid it down in a particular place, and he says, I looked and it wasn't there. So he said, we prayed a little bit and I came back and there it was, exactly where I placed it. Well, there was a bunch of chuckles. Well, my sister had to repent later on, but anyway. I'm betting one of his prayers was, Lord, help me find my iPad. All right, so we need to be careful. The other thing that we need to be careful is when we are observing others, that we remember that they are going through things that we have no idea that they are going through. And we need to talk to them in a spirit of love. All right, I've talked enough. Comments, questions, aggravations, and whatever. Disagreements, I can take those too. Have a good week.